This video is about natural selection in islands. So, natural selection is a mechanism of evolution, survival of the fittest. Organisms that are more adapted to their environment are more likely to survive and pass on the genes that aided their success. This process causes species to change and diverge over time. A constant process, environments change, and therefore, so do factors that determine success. Individuals in a species show a wide range of variation, and this variation is a result of differences in their genes caused by random mutations that can be inherited. In every population, more offspring are produced than can survive. This overproduction leads to competition, for example, food. Individuals with characteristics most suited to their environment are more likely to survive and reproduce. This is commonly known as survival of the fittest. The genes that allow these individuals to be successful within their environment are passed on to their offspring, which results in these specific genes becoming more common. And over a period of time, a species will gradually evolve. Islands. Oceanic islands provide many specula- spectacular examples of evolution. Study of their biogeography and the adaptive radiation of their flora and fauna provided inspiration to both Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace, the two co-discoverers of evolution by natural selection. Study of species distribution patterns in islands led to a much better understanding of what controls the number of species that can be supported in a habitat. Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace. Two of the most important thinkers of biology were Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace. In the 19th century, they both went on long expeditions to remote centers of the world or corners of the world, and they both made meticulous observations of the distribution and characteristics of the animals and plants they saw. They both ended up with the same flash of inspiration that biodiversity could be explained by evolution through natural selection. But they both also made numerous other important contributions to biogeography, ecology, and taxonomy, and especially the oceanic ecology and evolution. Darwin's 5 points on natural selection: overpopulation, competition, variation, survival of the fittest, and new species. Overpopulation. Organisms tend to produce more offspring, more than the environment can afford. Organisms will reproduce until something stops them. Organisms will reproduce until something stops them. Usually food. Competition. Because overpopulation, individuals compete with one another over limited resources. Competition occurs both in and between species. Then variation. Individuals of a population vary in their traits and characteristics. These variations are passed on to their offspring. Then survival of the fittest. Individuals with genetic traits are better adapted to their environment. This increase their chance of survival. It is called survival of the fittest. The new species. Last point is new species. New species results by inheritance of traits on genes that give them another advantage. New species evolve. Once again, 5 points: overpopulation, competition, variation, survival of the fittest, and new species. Darwin and Galapagos Island. The Galapagos Island is a volcanic archipelago in the Pacific Ocean. It is isolated terrain, shelters in diversity of plant and animal species, many found nowhere else. HMS Beagle launched its voyage from UK with Darwin in tow. Then natural selection in Galapagos. From 1831 to 1836, Darwin traveled around the world observing animals on different continents and islands. On the Galapagos Island, Darwin observed several species of finches with unique beak shapes. He observed these finches closely resembled another finch species on the mainland of South America, and that of the group of species in the Galapagos formed a grand series of beak sizes and shapes with very small differences between the most similar. Darwin imagined that the island species might be all modified from one original mainland species. In 1860, he wrote, "Seeing this gradation and diversity of structure in one small, intimately related group of birds, one might really fancy that from an original paucity of birds in this archipelago, one species had been taken and modified for different ends." Key points: Darwin observed the Galapagos finches had a grand series of beak sizes and shapes and predicted these species were modified from the original mainland species. Darwin called differences among species natural selection, which is caused by the inheritance of traits, competition between individuals, and the variation of traits. Offering with offspring with inherited characteristics that allow them to best compete with survive and have more offspring than those individuals with variations that are less able to compete. Then large billed finches feed more efficiently on large hard seeds, whereas smaller billed finches feed more efficiently on small soft seeds. When small soft seeds become rare, large billed finches will survive better, and there will be more larger billed birds in the following generation. When larger hard seeds become rare, the opposite will occur. Darwin called this mechanism of changes natural selection. Natural selection, Darwin argued, was the inevitable outcome of this principle that operated in nature. First, the characteristics of organisms are inherited or passed from parent to offspring. Second, more offsprings are produced than are able to survive. In other words, resources for survival and reproduction are limited. Third, offspring vary among each other in regard to their characteristics, and those variations are inherited. Out of these three principles, Darwin third, offspring vary among each other in regard to their characteristics, and those variations are inherited. Out of these three principles, Darwin reasoned that offspring with inherited characteristics that allow them to best compete for limited resources will survive and have more offspring than those individuals with variations that are less able to compete. Because characteristics are inherited, these traits will be better represented in the next generation. This will lead to change in population over generations in a process that Darwin called descent with modification or evolution. Darwin observed a population of giant tortoises in Galapagos archipelago to have longer necks than those that lived on other islands with dry lowlands. These tortoises were selected because they could reach more leaves and access more food than those that are short necked. In times of drought, when fewer leaves would be available, those that could reach more leaves had a better chance to eat and survive than those that couldn't reach the food source. Consequently, long-necked tortoises would be more likely to be reproductively successful and pass the long-necked trait to their offspring. Over time, only long-necked tortoises would be present in the population. And in 1858, Darwin and Wallace presented papers at the Linnean Society in London that discussed the idea of natural selection. The following year, Darwin's book on the origin of species was published. His book outlined the considerable detail his arguments for evolution by natural selection. Studies of natural selection after Darwin. Peter and Rosemary Grant and their colleagues have studied Galapagos finch populations every year since 1976 and have provided important demonstrations of the operations of natural selection. The Grants found changes from one generation to the next in the beak shapes of the medium ground finches on the Galapagos island of Daphne major. The medium ground finch feeds on seeds. Thus, birds have inherited variation in the bill shape, with some individuals having wide, deep bills and others having thinner bills. Large-billed birds feed more efficiently on large, hard seeds, whereas smaller bird feed more efficiently on small, soft seeds. During 1977, a drought period altered vegetation on the island. After this period, the number of seeds declined dramatically. The decline in small, soft seeds was greater than the decline in large, hard seeds. The large-billed birds were able to survive better than the small-billed birds the following year. The year following the drought, when the Grants measured beak sizes in the much reduced population, they found that the average bill size was larger. This was clear evidence for natural selection of all bill size caused by the availability of seeds. Grants had studied the inheritance of bill sizes and knew that the surviving large billed birds would tend to produce offspring with larger bills, so the selection would lead to evolution of bill size. Subsequent Studies by the grants have demonstrated selection on and evolution of bill size in the species in response to other changing conditions in the island. Wallace and Wallace Line. Alfred Russel Wallace was a British naturalist, explorer, geographer, anthropologist, biologist, and illustrator. He is best known for independently conceiving the theory of evolution through natural selection. His patent on the subject was jointly published with some of Charles Darwin's writings in 1858. Alfred Russel Wallace made many of his observations on the plants and animals of islands of Southeast Asia, then called the Malay Archipelago. He made some of the most important early observations on biogeography, leading to an understanding of the relationship between geographical changes and biological changes as they have occurred in past ages. So, phenomenon which fascinated Wallace and has occupied generations of biogeographers even ever since is the sudden change in flora and fauna that occur in the 20-mile wide channel between the small islands of Bali and Lombok. Bali, the animals, especially the birds and mammals, were clearly related to those of the larger islands of the West Java and Sumatra and mainland Malaysia. But on Lombok, the fauna was almost completely different, more closely related to that of New Guinea and Australia. The difference in the animal types present was as great as you would find between Europe and North America. Wallace identified the narrow channel between Bali and Lombok as the boundary, now known as Wallace Line, between two different geographic regions, the Oriental and the Australian. Wallace and Darwin proposed the theory of evolution by natural selection. Alfred Russel Wallace, who made his observations in the Amazon River basin in Brazil and in the island chain then called the Malay Archipelago, now in Indonesia. He only needed 3 years to analyze his data and propose the theory of evolution by natural selection. In 1855, he published his first general statement of the belief that specialized species evolved from pre-existing species. Every species has come into existence coincident both in space and time with a pre-existing closely allied species. Wallace and Darwin had come up with the same idea completely independently. Their idea met with huge resistance and ridicule from the religious establishment, but the significance of their idea was immediately appreciated in the scientific community. Alfred Russel Wallace, the struggle for existence, useful variations will tend to increase, unuseful or hurtful variations to diminish. Lamarck's hypothesis very different from that now advanced. Charles Darwin in 1859. Due to the limited resources, there is a struggle for existence among individuals, often with only a fraction of offspring surviving through each generation to reproduce successfully. It is not a random process that determines which individual will produce and which will not, as it depends in part on the genetic hereditary constitution of those surviving individuals. Those individuals whose inherited characteristics best suit them to that environment in which they live are likely to have more offspring than those that are not so well adapted to the environment. Thus, by definition, is natural selection. The unequal ability between individuals to survive and reproduce will lead to gradual evolution of the population with favorable characteristics accumulating over the generations through natural selection. Then, Argentine Pampas. The Pampas, meaning plain of, I don't know how to pronounce it, are grasslands covering up approximately 750,000 kilometers square of South America. The region includes portions of Argentina, all of Uruguay, and part of southern Brazil. Temperatures are generally temperate. Drought city temperatures in the summer can be quite hot, and the area is home to diverse wildlife such as pampas, deer, pumas, and the white-faced ibis. The living and extinct organisms that have been observed in the flat plains of this Argentine pampas. Pampas are vast grassy, treeless plains in the South America. From old riverbeds in the Argentine pampas, he dug up bony remains, fossils of extinct mammals such as Toxodon, Macro, Macrauchenia, Pyrotherium, and Thotherium. Toxodon resembles rhinoceros, camel, elephant, horses like that. The presence of Toxtherian noted that a horse had been in the ancient inhabitants of the continent. It was the Spanish settlers who reintroduced a modern house horse Ficus to the continent of South America in the 60th century. When Darwin collected the remains of giant armadillos and sloth of the same region, this observation made him to think of the fossil sequence of a given animal shelter species through the ages of a given animal species through the ages and cause of extinction. So, on traveling from North to South America, Darwin observed that one species was replaced by another but slightly different species. In the southern part of Argentina, Darwin caught a rare species of ostrich that was smaller and differently colored from more other common American ostrich. This rare species, later named as Rhea darwins, it appeared Darwin that the species changed not only in the time but also due to geographical distance. Conclusion. Traditionally, studies of evolution were concerned only with the visible structures of organisms such as birds' wings, giraffe's neck, horse teeth, and the like, and their function. The guiding principle by which evolutionary changes in such phenotypes were interpreted was Darwin's theory of natural selection or the survival of the fittest. In Darwin's time, the mechanism of inheritance and the nature of heritable variations were unknown, and this caused Darwin difficulty. But with his great insight, he was able to grasp the real significance of natural selection and evolution. With the rise of Mendelian genetics, the difficulty with which troubled Darwin was gradually resolved, and the development of population genetics, the synthesis of Darwinism and Mendelism, was achieved. This led to the synthetic theory of evolution, which flourished and grew into an impressive edifice toward the end of 1950s. Although various factors such as mutation, recombination, and migration were taken into account, the dominance feature of the synthetic theory was still its great emphasis on natural selection. It claimed that the speed and direction of evolution are predominantly determined by positive selection, with mutation playing only a subsidiary role. Because of this chapter, it has also been called the Neo-Darwinian theory.